Okay, in this video, we're going to get our hands dirty. We're going to fire up the spreadsheet, and I'm going to take you through three things. The first is the basics of how team productivity connects to your overall revenue levels and how you can improve it off the back of it. The second is we're going to show how you can compare your expectations to reality in order to improve your business performance. And the third is I'm going to give you another example of how you can compare your time tracking data at a client or even a department level, depending on the level of detail you want to go to. All right, let's dive into it. Okay, let's start with the basics of team productivity. There's 365 days in a year, which means there's 52 weeks every year. But for a full-time team member, they're not going to be working all 52. We've got to take out holiday and leave. So let's call, for this example, they're working 48 out of those 52 weeks. And as they're a full-time team member, they're contracted for 38 hours in this example each week, which means the hours available annually is just 48 weeks times 38 hours. And that's the potential hours we have contracted for this team member. 60% of that time should be billable. That's an initial goal. Some people have a higher goal for what time should be spent on client-facing work that's billable externally. Obviously, there's other time for internal team meetings, all those kind of things that need to be taken into account. So if we just set our initial goal as 60% of the time they're at work, they're doing billable work, that means our billable expectation is about just over 1,000 hours per year that is chargeable. If their charge out rate was $220, that means if they hit their goals of 60% billable for the whole year, they potentially could be bringing in $240,000 for the business. And this is just for one employee. But you can see, say if they're billable a little bit more often, let's say we can get that up to 70% of their time spent is on billable work, they're now bringing in $280,000 to the business. So another variable, if we go back to 60%, is their charge out rate. If you can price and package your services in a way that really shows the value you deliver, and you can say, you know what, our charge out rate is $250 for this team member, boom, you can shoot it up to 273. So there's multiple ways we can try and drive better performance in the business, but this gives you a good understanding of how they're all connected. So now you have the basics of how team productivity can affect the overall revenue of the business. And what I might do is actually hide these columns, but we'll go back to 220 here for the charge out rate, because that's the charge out rate we're using in our next example. But keep in mind how that charge out rate and how the percentage of billable work was driving that better revenue for our business. So we'll hide these columns now. So the concept I want to talk through now is how comparing expectations versus reality helps us close the loop and improve month on month, comparing what we thought we were going to do on a job to what we actually did on a job. And it's really important to close that loop. So this is an example setup of how you might want to analyze your time data once you start tracking it. We've got our client portfolio list here, 1 through 9. We've got the amount of revenue each one of those clients is paying us. We also have an expectation of the charge out rate, that when we were building this quote, we might have been budgeting for a certain charge out rate for certain team members. But to keep it simple, I'm going to have a blanket charge out rate across the whole business of $220 for an hour of your team member's time working on that project. And you would have come up with a rough idea of how many hours it was going to take you on client number 1 to earn 25 grand. For this example, I've said we're budgeted 114 hours. So that's step 1. That's our expectation. That was connected to our quoting, our proposal, and actually winning the job is that expectation. Where we really get a great understanding of what's happening is comparing that to reality once we actually have our time tracking data. So you can see here in this example, we've got actual hours of 100 that we spent on this job on client number 1 for 25 grand. So the actual billable rate, you can see I've done a quick calc here. We earned 25 grand this month and we only spent 100 hours instead of 114. Our actual billable rate is higher at $250 hour, $250 per hour. So that's a huge win. The second example here, client number 2, we earned 10 grand. We budgeted 45 hours, but we actually spent 85 hours. So we were over servicing this client, spending way too much time. And you can see as a result, our actual billable rate was $120. So we weren't earning $220 for an hour of a team member's time. We're earning a lot less. And through analyzing this variance, we can get an understanding of why this job is so much less profitable. And then we can dive into why this variance happened. So it's a great indicator of what's going off track, what's succeeding, and helps us keep a finger on the pulse of what we need to do and the questions we need to ask to dig into this data a little bit more. So that's how to compare your expectations of what you thought was going to happen to reality once the month is done and all the time tracking data is being looked at, to compare and work out which are the problem childs, where are we spending too much time, what needs to change to improve the performance of them. So once you're looking at your client list, comparing the hours you're expecting to spend, the charge out rate you're expecting to the actual hours that you spent, and what in effect the actual billable rate was as a result of those hours, you can then get a bit more creative. So instead of looking at it just on a client by client basis, if you want to go into that next layer down, you can then start to look at maybe your SEO department and have a look at the actual tasks connected to that project or to that department in order to work out what you want to be looking at and how you want to be tracking those hours. So this would be the first one I would suggest starting with, just comparing on a client by client basis how things are going and digging in from there. But if you want to get more nuanced, the team are used to tracking their time. They understand the difference and the importance of putting their time into the different tasks. You can then look to start comparing it on a department basis or on a task by task basis. But that is the second level I would suggest. I would suggest starting with just client by client basis, get the team understanding why, and then potentially go that next layer down to give you those deeper department level insights. Cheers.